is not Fox News. That is nasa.gov. Carbon dioxide fertilization is greening the earth, a study finds. In fact, we are finding out that the earth is healthier than it's ever been over the past 500 years. And that is due to this process known as global greening. According to NASA, in a study published April 26, 2016, from a quarter to half of Earth's vegetated lands has shown significant greening over the last 35 years, largely due to rising levels of atmospheric carbon dioxide, according to a new study published in the journal Nature Climate Change on April 25th. An international team of 32 authors from 24 institutions in 8 countries led the effort, which involved using satellite data from NASA's Moderate Resolution Imaging Spectrometer and the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration's Advanced Very High Resolution Radiometer instruments to help determine the leaf area index, or amount of leaf cover, over the planet's vegetated regions. The greening represents an increase in leaves on plants and trees equivalent in area to 2 times the continental United States. Far from there being a climate change crisis, in fact, the world has never been better off, and it has never been healthier. I want to read to you a selection from Bjorn Lomborg's book False Alarm. Who is Bjorn Lomborg? He is one of Time magazine's 100 most influential people in the world, and his numerous books include The Skeptical Environmentalist. His think tank, the Copenhagen Consensus Center, was ranked by the University of Pennsylvania as one of the world's top 20 advocacy campaigns. Lomborg is a frequent commentator in print and broadcast media for outlets including the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, The Guardian, CNN, Fox, and the BBC. His monthly column is published in multiple languages by dozens of influential newspapers across all continents. In 2009, Business Insider cited Lomborg as one of the 10 most well-respected global warming skeptics, and Lomborg campaigned against the Kyoto Protocol. Hear that, Greg Graffin? And other measures to cut carbon emissions in the short term in favor of more pressing problems and more effective actions. In his latest book, False Alarm, Bjorn writes about this phenomenon of global greening. He writes, "We are seeing an unprecedented greening of the world, which scientists have been slow to recognize, but global greening has now been thoroughly corroborated in a number of global studies. The biggest satellite study to date, published in 2016, confirmed that over the past 3 decades, upward of half the world's vegetated area is getting greener, whereas only 4% is browning. The overwhelming cause of global greening is carbon dioxide fertilization. That's right. Carbon dioxide, which causes global warming, also helps plants grow, and more carbon dioxide makes them grow more. Reforestation and more intensive agricultural practices also contribute to the greening of the earth. China has seen its green area almost double in the last 17 years. Researchers find that global greening over the past 35 years has increased leaves on plants and trees, equivalent in area to 2 times the continental United States. It is equivalent to greening the entire continent of Australia with plants or trees 2 times over. It is quite remarkable that over a few decades we got the equivalent of 2 entire new continents of green because of carbon dioxide, and virtually nobody has heard about it. As we emit more carbon dioxide over the century, the world will keep getting greener. If we measure the weight of all the vegetation in the world, one standard estimate shows that at the turn of the last century we had about 530 billion tons on average over a year. The mass of greenery declined slightly over the next 70 years as people cut down more forest and partly replaced it with farmland containing less green mass. But something amazing started happening in the 1970s. Mostly because of global warming, we started getting more green vegetation. And this will continue over the century as we continue to emit more fertilizing carbon dioxide. Indeed, if we follow a standard worst-case scenario for carbon dioxide emissions, to the end of the century we could end up with almost 50% more green mass in the world by 2100. By one estimate, we could be above the amount of green the world had in 1500 before we started the widespread reduction in global vegetation." End quote. That's right. the Earth could end up being greener than it was back in the days of Christopher Columbus and the Spanish Inquisition, well before any industrialization on a major scale. The Earth is getting healthier. And another thing to think about is as you get more plants and more green matter, what do plants and green matter do? Well, they absorb more CO2. It's a self-balancing system. And that's why this idea of a tipping point is so incredibly stupid. Look at news headlines like these. I'm sure you've seen them. Here's one from the formerly respected Forbes magazine. Carbon dioxide levels just hit 417 parts per million, highest in human history. So I want you to analyze that for a second. Highest in human history. Well, when you look into human history, it's 0.1 to 0.2% of Earth's history. So if you put that in its proper context, think about that headline. The Earth just hit the highest concentration of CO2 it's ever had for 0.1% of its history. It's like, okay, big whoop. It's like, well, what about the other 99.9% of Earth's history? Maybe we should look at that if we're going to study global climate. Who cares about 0.1% of history? And that begs the other question. If it's the highest in human history, what's the highest it's ever been? Well, it turns out the amount of CO2 in the air is anywhere between 12 and 17 times higher in our past, proving that there is no tipping point at which climate spirals out of control and the Earth explodes in a fireball. 12 to 17 times higher. Think about how hard mankind would have to work to put 17 times more CO2 in the air. I mean, for every coal plant that dots the landscape across the entire Earth, you would have to multiply that by 17 coal plants for every single coal plant. Every car, multiply it by 17, just to get to the highest level that we know of in Earth's history, and that still wasn't a tipping point. We're nowhere near a tipping point if such a thing existed, but of course that would imply positive feedback loops, and I've done a video on this. Positive feedback loops are almost unheard of in nature. Almost everything in nature is a negative feedback loop, and in fact, probably the only positive feedback loop you see in your day-to-day life is the reaction going on the surface of the sun. And yet there's even more reasons to be optimistic beyond that. In fact, in 2020, the UN has revised what it believes global population will be in the year 2100. All of these climate models were built on the idea that human population is going to continue to grow. In fact, they expected 9.4 to 12.7 billion people will be on Earth by the year 2100. In a new study published by The Lancet on July 14, 2020, the UN now expects 6.29 billion people by 2100, 33 to 50% lower than the projections that all of the climate models are using. And so this just destroys every climate study you've ever read about. But wait, there's more. The most popular climate model used by climate scientists due to its simplicity and ease of use is called magic. You know what I told you about them hiding things in plain sight to mock you? How do they know climate change is real? Magic. I kid you not. MAGICC. That's the name of the model. They know climate change is real by using magic. This sort of thing is no accident. It's part of the rituals you see, black men in dresses and celebrities covering one eye, and a giant snake statue over the Pope. They want to see just how much they can sneak past you. But back to the magic model. This is off the magicwiki.org. They write, in other words, magic is as simple as possible, but as mechanistic as necessary. In fact, it is so simple you can see here in previous model versions, the ocean area profile is uniform with depth and corresponding downwelling modeled as a stream of polar sinking water from the top mixed layer to the bottom layer. Think about that for a second. In previous model versions, the ocean area profile is uniform. It was a uniform depth. This wasn't a complex model of the Earth. They left all sorts of things out. I mean, even Minecraft, the ocean, has various depths. It's very simple. It's like what's called a slab ocean model. They even leave out things as simple as clouds. Well, what happens when you include clouds into climate models? Well, the Finnish published a study in the journal Science Daily, and this study was confirmed by Japanese researchers. When you include clouds into climate models, almost all evidence of man-made climate change disappears. In fact, it looks like this magic model is so simple you can actually download it and run it on your home PC. If you're a coder, you can actually break into the code and figure out how it is they're calculating these things. I mean, you're no more learning anything about the environment than you are becoming a great mayor by building a good city in SimCity 2000. It's just a simple computer game. And so you might be thinking, well, what about the other 100 or so climate models at the 24 primary research centers around the world? Those are more complicated. And it's like, yeah, and they vary widely, plus or minus 5 or 6 degrees Celsius. There's no consensus there whatsoever. Human beings cannot model complex phenomena. We don't know what's happening. We don't know what's going to happen. You can't use a computer model and predict the future, or else we'd all be filthy rich in the stock market. But one thing is becoming abundantly clear. There is no crisis. There is no cause for panic. The activists and environmentalists, Michael Moore, Michael Schellenberger, and more, are coming over to that very side. Capitalism is making us all safer. It is lowering population growth. It is creating enough food. There is no crisis. There is no catastrophe coming. Life has never been better. In fact, the greatest threat to the environment and to the earth is the ignorance and stupidity of the environmental activist, who would have people in third world countries go back to burning biomass rather than upgrading their standard of living and reducing their pollution by burning coal.